Welcome to the Data Magic Podcast, the official podcast of Project Unicorn. We are a national initiative dedicated to radically improving data interoperability through the safe, secure, and seamless flow of education data to support student learning. Each episode, we sit down with leaders, innovators, and builders who are designing the infrastructure for real-time, secure, student-centered data. Whether you're a district or state leader, an EdTech developer, or simply curious about the future of education, we're here to help you understand why interoperability matters and how we can help you all make it a reality. My name is Harsh Upadhyay, Project Associate at Project Unicorn and the EdSafe AI Alliance, and I'm really thrilled to have this opportunity to host an episode on the Data Magic podcast. In this episode, we are introducing the Project Unicorn community to someone new. Katie Bradford joins Project Unicorn as a senior associate, bringing a career built inside the companies our listeners buy from, including Instructure, D2L, and several others. We look at the challenges she has watched persist in schools, what it costs when systems don't talk to each other, and what she's working on now. Katie, thanks so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. I'm glad to be here.
So, Katie, to set the stage, can you share briefly your background and maybe introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. So, hi everyone. I'm Katie Bradford, and I am now leading Project Unicorn at Innovate EDU. I've spent most of my career in EdTech. I've worked across partnerships, business development, and ecosystem strategy, like Harsh said, at companies like Instructure, D2L, Waterford, Class Wallet, and VoiceThread. A lot of that work has given me sort of a front row seat to both the promise of education technology and the very real challenges schools face when their systems and data don't work well together. So I'm really excited to bring that perspective to Project Unicorn and help make interoperability feel more practical and useful for the people doing this work every day.
I think that perfectly segues into my first question, which is, you mentioned you've worked across a lot of companies like D2L and Class Wallet, etc. Across all of those experiences, what is a central challenge that you've seen persist in schools?
Yeah, I mean, I think like the sort of core idea is that schools are now completely surrounded and immersed in technology and data, but too much of the burden of making it all work together still falls on the people who work there. Um, so like we've invested enormously in ed tech, right? There's so many tools out there available. Anything that you want to do with technology, you can do. And you have choices for how to do them. But we've often added tools to schools to learning environments faster than we've built the infrastructure to connect them. So the problem isn't really a lack of data. There's a lot of data floating around out there, as we all know, but it's the fragmentation of that data, not all feeding into one place that makes it easy to use it. Um, the different systems kind of work well on their own. You might have really great dashboards and experiences for looking at data from a particular tool, but then the experience breaks down between those tools, and you can't compile that data into something that's truly useful. You end up with a lot of manual work, duplicate data entry, uh, lots of inconsistent records, and quite frankly, frustrated educators. Um, so interoperability can sound technical and maybe feel a little overwhelming to those folks who are less comfortable with technology, but ultimately it's really about, whether useful information can get to the right person at the right time.
No, absolutely. You know, uh, is there a specific moment or a meeting or a conversation with a teacher or a district where you've kind of seen where interoperability hasn't worked and it's cost someone.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say I've watched this play out dozens of times. Um, some examples that pop into my head is, district staff having to export CSVs and manually reconcile them, or someone spending hours fixing roster issues because two systems, uh, organize their data differently and they're not really compatible. Or, a useful tool with great information, but that information is trapped inside the product and can't be exported in a useful way. There's so many ways that you sort of see these problems play out. And, ultimately, one workaround is not like catastrophic. Sometimes things don't work exactly the way you want them to, and that's fine. But multiply it across teachers and tools and students and school days, and the cost becomes, suddenly enormous. And the hidden cost is time, but also it becomes an issue of trust. People, especially, the teachers who are trying to help their students every day, they stop believing, um, they either stop believing the data itself or they stop believing in the system that's available to them because it doesn't do anything for them that really helps them with their learners. And, as we all know, educators are already totally overloaded and overworked. And, more manual workarounds are the last thing that they need. We need things to work together seamlessly to start saving time, as so many of these tools have promised people that they will do.
Right. I mean, I completely get that. When one district kind of has a problem with interoperability, you kind of generally have a ticket level resolution. But what do vendors need to do to essentially make interoperability part of the product roadmap as opposed to, a one-off solution for one district?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say a request for interoperability rarely goes to like a single person who can just say yes. It's, generally going to be like a multi-step process that will involve, product and engineering and security and legal and all kinds of other people. Um, so, I would say like, the more people uh, who need a problem or need a problem fixed, I guess. And, depending on the urgency of the problem, if it's an issue of security or privacy, it suddenly becomes much more urgent. But, on the vendor side, they are going to look at, how many of our customers need this, how urgent is it? Otherwise, it may, get prioritized behind other things.
Mhm.
Yeah. So,
Fair enough. I
yeah.
want to take a step back.
Hmm.
Katie, you have, of course, been on both sides of the table. You've been on the district side as an educator. You've also been, of course, you've worked at Instructure and the likes of those types of vendor organizations. What is something that the rest of us might have missed who might have been on only one side of the table?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say, um, this may be more like general interpersonal advice, or maybe that may be what it sounds like, but it really is true based on my experience. Um, there's a tendency for each side to think that the other side is being unreasonable. That's just like human nature. From a teacher's perspective, you need something and you need it to work. From the vendor's perspective, there's a lot of things that need to be worked on, and there are limited resources to do those things. And both sides just thinks like, why won't they just do this? Or why won't they listen? It's important. We need it. Um, but like from the vendor perspective, even like a seemingly simple integration can compete with security work, accessibility, development of new product features. There are often many customer requests. Technical debt is also a huge issue. That was a particularly of importance during my time at D2L. It's just it's impossible to know where things stand for both sides, and it can be a real struggle to communicate without getting frustrated. Um, but a company isn't a single brain. Product and engineering and sales all have different incentives. And I think, taking a few minutes to consider what those incentives might be, can help you guide your conversation in a direction that's more productive. Um, for example, in like from an engineering perspective, if a fix is going to require um, you know, many engineering hours, that's going to make them less likely to jump on it immediately, versus a fix that might, be relatively quick. So, but like I said earlier, demand is really important. So it's easier to deprioritize a request from a single customer. But if you know that there are other districts or other people experiencing the same problem, working together to sort of raise your voices, that I would say that's the single most effective tool in your toolkit. Is, talk to your colleagues and your peers at other districts and get them on board with supporting your request with the vendor. Um, and then I would say, vendors also really need clarity. Um, so, if rather than going and saying our tools don't work very well together, make them work better together. That's a vague request. But if you can do a little bit of research on like specific standards for interoperability, like those managed by the One EdTech organization, that can make it much more actionable. Um, and then, uh, I would say that like the productive answer here isn't that districts need to understand vendors or vendors need to do better. It's more like both sides need ways to align their incentives with each other. So I think one of Project Unicorn's most useful roles is going to be translating between those two worlds. And I hope that we can do more of that in the future.
I was just going to say that, too often people are trapped within their own logic bubbles, and that's why our work at Project Unicorn is that much more important. Just bridging the gap between stakeholder logic bubbles and ideas, right? Um,
Absolutely. Sometimes a mediator is exactly what you need to, understand another perspective.
yep. So, Katie, tell me, what are you working on right now, and what does progress look like at Project Unicorn 6 months from now?
Yeah, so I'm brand new. So I am doing a lot of learning right now, but my first priority is probably do as much listening as I can, understand where the community sees the biggest gaps and where Project Unicorn can create leverage right away. So I'm excited to hear more from the community and get an idea of where people are coming from. So it's not just a collection of supporters, but a group actually helping to drive the work that we want to do. Um, with the annual state of the sector report that we put out, we want to use this anniversary as an opportunity to look at what the field has learned over time, not just, another annual snapshot. With Project Unicorn's 10-year anniversary, it's a good time to look back. So, um, I want to continue making interoperability practical and actionable, especially for school systems. And I want to engage vendors also in a way that moves beyond just signing a pledge and toward, real meaningful adoption and accountability. Um, and then, look for opportunities to connect Project Unicorn's research and tools and advocacy so that they reinforce each other. So I would say like 6 months from now, when I hopefully have a little bit better of a sense of what I'm doing and where we're headed, um, I want people in the community to feel more connected to the work and to each other, and to be able to point to something that Project Unicorn has actually helped them to do differently.
We're so excited for you to be here, Katie. You mentioned that you'd want to hear from the community. I'm interested in who are the stakeholders you want to hear most from, and what are some of the problems that you want to help solve best?
Yeah. So starting with who I want to hear from, really, I mean, I'm excited to hear from anyone who has ideas on this subject, but some specifics would be like district leaders dealing with integration pain, um, that maybe doesn't show up in the glossy product demos, that you might see off the cuff. I want to hear from teachers or staff experiencing the downstream consequences of these like disconnected systems. I would love to hear from vendors who genuinely want to work on and improve interoperability, but maybe need some help getting through some of the obstacles that they're facing. I also want to hear with people who disagree with Project Unicorn or think that the current approach isn't working. That is really where the growth is going to occur for us as a team. And I really want to hear like what can we do better. Um, and then state agencies, super interested in what patterns they're seeing across districts. Really anyone who solved something that others are still struggling with. So those are some ideas for folks I'd love to hear from. And then, as far as the problems that we can solve, I think what we're going to do best at is surfacing patterns and connecting people, that maybe are working on similar issues or, might have complementary skills or solutions. Create resources and convene the right stakeholders. That's, where I think we can really make a big difference. Sometimes the most valuable thing is discovering that 10 districts are independently fighting the exact same battle. And then, having a mediator who can bring those groups together and, all of the the firepower that they have to and the resources and the problem solving skills to fix that problem together.
Well, Project Unicorn community, that's your call to action. Thanks so much for a wonderful conversation here, Katie. We're so excited for you to lead the work here at Project Unicorn. And thanks so much to our listeners for tuning in to this episode of the Data Magic Podcast. If you're ready to break down data silos and build a safer, more connected digital ecosystem for your students, we invite you to join the movement. Head over to projectunicorn.org to access our tools, download our latest briefs, and sign the Project Unicorn Pledge. Don't forget to subscribe to Data Magic on your favorite podcast platform and share this episode with a colleague who's ready to make classroom data work for learners. Until next time, keep safe, keep connecting, and let's keep creating data magic.